you know me from the internet, you might know me as White Panther or White P4 Nth 3R if you use a screen reader, which will become relevant later. You can find me at whitepanther.com, and I am a developer advocate for Contentful. My history goes from being a freelance musician to a music teacher in secondary schools to a front-end developer and comedian to a tech lead, and now I do this after I started Twitch streaming in the pandemic because I didn't see anybody and my technical skills were degrading. I wanted to keep up to date with stuff, and I'm now here in front of you. If you haven't heard of Contentful, it's a headless CMS that gives you a generous free plan, loads of open source tooling, and it can help you build some really great stuff. Fun fact, also yesterday I won the Jamstack Community Creator of the Year Award at Jamstack Conf. So I'm coming here fresh from Jamstack Conf. I actually just before this was giving a Jamstack workshop as well, but we're gonna go and we're gonna have some fun. So why is my thingy not working? Here we go. Right, I think I'm gonna have to use my arrow keys. Okay, Stephen Hawking said, I believe that life on Earth is at an ever-increasing risk of being wiped out by a disaster, such as a sudden nuclear war or genetically engineered virus like coronavirus or other dangers, if you believe in conspiracy theories. Okay, so imagine it's 2031 and the apocalypse has arrived. The internet is running on a slow 3G connection and all display screens are broken. And this is what people are Googling for, how to build a fallout shelter. And so accessibility and being able to find that information on the web is now paramount to the survival of the human race. So how do we prepare the web for the impending apocalypse of 2031? And why is it important now? So let's first talk about accessibility for slow connections. The whole world is on slow 3G. There are almost 2 billion websites in the world, and 95% of those websites use JavaScript. So why is this bad news for the apocalypse? Let's take a look at the network tab of mobile.twitter.com, and let's have a look at the files that it loads when you try to load it. There are 37 JavaScript files worth 1.44 megabytes compressed, 27 JSON and other files, and 9 image files. And I think that's a lot on a mobile phone on slow 3G. Let's look at the Lighthouse tab, and you'll see that the time to interactive is 5.8 seconds, and the original trace of that page load in Lighthouse tools is absolutely no content whatsoever. There's a lot of requests for JavaScript. They're pretty expensive and it takes time to load. Plus, in the apocalypse with the flaky internet, it might fail. If you're trying to find out how to fight off all of those zombies in the apocalypse, you're not going to find it if your connection is that slow downloading all of that JavaScript. In a tweet from Phil Hawksworth in April 2018, he says that someone at BuzzFeed said our monitoring tells us that around 1% of requests for JavaScript on BuzzFeed time out. And that's around 13 million requests per month. So with my calculations, that's around 156 million failed requests for JavaScript each year for BuzzFeed alone. And that's potentially that many, I don't even know how to say that number, requests for failed requests for JavaScript on the web each year, obviously based on the percentage of all websites that use JS, assuming all websites have the same traffic as BuzzFeed. Now, it's quite unrealistic, but it could be that much. And we know with these zombies who are trying to break down our doors that the time to interactive in the apocalypse is the difference between life and death. So how can we serve critical content faster? Do we abandon JavaScript? I'm talking to the Jamstack. The Jamstack is trying to go some way to try and solve this, and mainly through pre-rendering, which is the process of building all of your website into static pages at build time from all of your data and everything that you need, and serving it as static HTML to your visitors. So it loads super fast. There's no client-side loading to load in, and you can get that content really quickly. Static site generators such as Nuxt, Universal, Next, 11t, Gatsby, and Jekyll all use this kind of approach, and they're trying to get that web experience faster to the visitors. But does modern Jamstack really solve this problem of loads and loads and loads of JavaScript files being sent to the browser? If you take a look at my website, whitepanther.com, this is built with Next.js, a static site generator. But when you look at the network tab on a normal page load, you can see that there are actually more than 30 JavaScript files being served, despite Next.js saying it serves static HTML files. An HTML document is loaded at the top of the request, but then it's followed by loads and loads and loads of other chunked and bundled up JavaScript. If I get that document right at the top of the network tab, why do we need all this JavaScript when the document has already loaded? So I did an experiment. Let's turn off JavaScript. And look, my JavaScript is all blocked, it's all turned off, but the website still works. You can prove that I've turned off JavaScript. It still works. And if you compare the JavaScript enabled version with the JavaScript disabled version, you'll have a look at the load times. You'll see that without JavaScript, it actually loads and works in under 300 milliseconds. When it's enabled, it loads in under 800 milliseconds. And so there's quite a big difference there. And however, this is on a normal internet connection. And I have the fastest internet in this house that you can get in the country. What if I change my browser to emulate slow 3G as we would be emulated in the apocalypse? And let's have a look at the difference in load times. They're actually much bigger. So without JavaScript, it's about 9 seconds still to load that page of static HTML. And when you have JavaScript turned on, it's around 25 seconds. So over 3 times longer to load this page that is exactly the same content-wise. Furthermore, if you look at the amount of data downloaded with and without JavaScript, there's 300 kilobytes without JavaScript and 1.4 megabytes with JavaScript, and that is the compressed version. And so if you look at it as uncompressed, my JavaScript enabled site is actually downloading 3.6 megabytes to the browser in 25 seconds. And you can see how that's not realistic in an apocalypse, especially on a mobile device, because we don't have desktops in the apocalypse anymore. I did another experiment, and I wanted to generate 3 versions of one page of my site without JavaScript in 3 different ways. So again, I used Next.js, and I statically generated this single page with some data from Contentful, and it came in at 105 kilobytes in 4.72 seconds. And this is still on slow 3G as well. Just to prove that JavaScript was turned off, I created a client-side rendered page as well. Obviously, because there's no content coming, because you can't load the data from the client, there was a slightly fewer amount of kilobytes in the same amount of time. So here you see, actually, the numbers are pretty much the same, but I'm getting absolutely no data on the client-side requested page. So go and use server-side or static pre-rendering as much as you can. And then the third version, I decided to build this completely with no data fetching. I just copied and pasted all of my data into a single HTML page with some CSS with no framework. And you can see that actually the pre-rendered version from Next.js plus the completely static app version that I created with no framework, they're actually pretty much the same. 105 kilobytes versus 100, 4.72 seconds versus 4.71. And so actually, despite this complete no framework version winning, the Jamstack frameworks, Next.js is actually pretty good when JavaScript is turned off, and is pretty comparable to just plain HTML and CSS and no JavaScript. So obviously these frameworks make our lives a lot easier, but do you actually need a framework to serve some kind of just static content really? So I would suggest that you always use your judgment, understand actually what the trade-offs are. And obviously it's absolutely ridiculous to expect to manage such a large scale content infrastructure in just static HTML and CSS. But sometimes you can just serve content statically without having to do anything fancy and no JavaScript frameworks. And actually it gives your users a better experience for the apocalypse. So coming back to accessibility for slow connections, how can we get our websites apocalypse ready? Because our websites must work without JavaScript in the apocalypse. And if you don't use JavaScript, or if you use a lot less JavaScript, you decrease the load time, you decrease the page weight, because there is no progressive enhancement in the apocalypse, especially when your display screens are broken and your internet connection is really, really slow. One interesting fact that since I wrote this talk, a new front-end JavaScript-based framework came out, and it's very, very much alpha, and I have experimented with it. But this is Astro, and Astro actually makes it its core mission value to basically give you no JavaScript to the browser if you don't need it. You saw how my Next.js application, even though it was statically pre-rendered, delivered 30 JavaScript files to the browser. Astro does a lot less. It gives you like 0 JavaScript by default. And so the Jamstack is kind of evolving and changing to solve that problem, but it's got a long way to go. It's definitely not production ready yet. So let's talk about accessibility for broken screens. So when screens are broken, you don't see fancy website designs and animations anymore. And so how do we architect our sites to actually work better on things that people can't see? So there are almost 2 billion websites in the world, and 96% of those websites use CSS. This is what makes our websites look really cool. So why is this bad news for the apocalypse? So this article from developers.google.com talks about render blocking CSS. So by default, CSS is treated as a render blocking resource, which means that the browser won't render any processed content until the CSS object model is constructed and the browser knows how to render which bits of paint to which bits of the DOM. This advice is make sure to keep your CSS lean, deliver it as quickly as possible, and use media types and queries to unblock rendering. I say, let's not do that, because in the apocalypse, timed interactive is the difference between life and death. And that CSS is going to block that critical content, and we're not going to see anything in that first trace like we saw on mobile.twitter.com. So how can we serve critical content even faster? Do we abandon CSS as well as JavaScript? So you might have noticed I've got lots of tattoos, and there's a big saying in the tattoo industry, go big or go home. And in this case, I say go small or we go die in the zombie apocalypse. So let's make that static HTML page as small as possible in terms of kilobytes. Let's remove all CSS and class names. We don't need any of this nonsense. Let's remove all the font import. Google Fonts is great, but we don't need that because no one's going to see it because their screens are broken. Now, I've got some SVGs on that page, so let's remove them. Every byte counts. I don't need all that nonsense. And plus, I can save some more bytes by getting rid of all the ARIA label stuff that I don't need now because I don't have SVGs to account for the accessibility concerns. Let's optimize it. Also, I found a really cool trick when I was writing this talk, that you can actually trick the browser into providing a 0 kilobyte favicon. So I don't know whether you've noticed, if you don't include a favicon in your root or your public folder in your websites, the browser will just throw a 404. And I hate seeing red in any network tab. But if you want to save like those 10 bytes that a favicon can take up, you can actually base encode, use a base64 encoded string and trick your browser into thinking you've got a favicon, and it disappears from the top and your browser doesn't throw a 404. So we can get rid of all those useless bytes because no one's going to see those favicons. And now this is what our website looks like. We've got nice underlined links. We've got actual semantic lists and numbers and bullet points and horizontal rules and everything. And it looks rather like this very iconic website that you might have seen out in the wild before from quite a few years ago. It's lightweight, it's responsive, it just works. There's no bugs, it's all text and it's beautiful. So let's compare the original static page that I had with CSS and stuff with the no CSS and no SVGs. And you can see that we've reduced the size from 100 kilobytes to 4.6 kilobytes. And now it loads in just over 2 seconds compared to just under 5. So that apocalypse life-saving content is coming to you in 2 seconds. I think it's still too long, but it's better than 5 seconds. And plus, with that page, you get 100% across all Lighthouse scores. Look, time to interactive is 0.8 seconds compared to Twitter, which was like 5 seconds. So we're doing pretty well. So I've been talking about accessibility a lot and talking about broken screens and ARIA labels and whatnot. So we're going to go quite deep into this. So in 2021, WebAIM surveyed 1 million homepages for accessibility. Now, across the 1 million homepages, over 51 million distinct accessibility errors were detected. And that's an average of 51.4 errors per page. That's pretty steep. And it means that many, many people in the world cannot effectively use your websites, and which means that you can't save your life with your apocalypse life-saving content. So what is going wrong? Let's look at all the different types of failures and focus on them one by one with examples. So look at this. 86.4% of home pages suffer from low contrast text. Now, what's this caused by? It's caused by CSS. We already know that we're going to abandon CSS anyway. But what I did is I went through all of these failures and I went to Wikipedia and looked at the top 50 websites in the world. And most of these examples that I'm going to show you are from the top 50 websites in the world. So the first one, even YouTube is not safe and violates accessibility rules. Look at this little copyright down here. You might think that this little copyright 2021 Google LLC is not important, but it's going to come up in those accessibility failures. Here's the HTML for it. It does have some display none on it and display none, but we're going to ignore that. Now, the accessibility failure is caused by this color combination of the background and the foreground color. Now, I've got a really handy tool that I use. It was actually built by an ex-colleague of mine at a different place I used to work. And it's a Chromium plugin called the Color Contrast Checker. And you can use a color picker to pick the different colors on the page and see how they pass at or fail at AA, AAA, AA, AAA, normal, and large. And then you can also play about with the hues and the saturations to find colors that actually work well together and pass accessibility checks. So you can see that Google fails on 3 out of 4 on YouTube. But however, if you remove that CSS, which we're going to do, it doesn't actually matter. So let's just like forget all this faffy CSS. And then we actually remove 86.4% of those home pages failing for low contrast. It could be just one tiny bit. It could be the whole page. Gray on gray is such a problem in the tech industry and the design industry at the moment. So the next one, missing alternative text for images. 60.6% of home pages, again, caused by HTML. So why do we need alternative text for images? Some of you might know, some of you might not. It's for people who use assistive technology such as screen readers. If you can't see an image, you need your device to read out what that image represents. Now, we're going to see a very big theme coming up in the rest of what I'm going through, and you'll see AliExpress a lot. Now, AliExpress, sort of the top e-commerce sites in the world. It's in the top 50 websites on Wikipedia for traffic, and it's really broken. So let's have a look at the homepage of AliExpress. We see we have this image in this carousel. First and foremost, if you look at the accessibility tree in Chrome here, you can see that we've got generic. We've got a whole bunch of div soup that goes down to this image, and it's got no alternative text on the image. It's got no context. It's just a link. There's not even a title on the link. If someone hovers over that with their screen reader selector, they have no context whatsoever. What's actually quite interesting is you might notice that our AliExpress have chosen to make this completely hidden to ARIA screen readers. And maybe with the concept in their brains that if it's hidden, it doesn't matter, which I think is absolute nonsense. Accessibilitydeveloperguide.com says, whenever you think about hiding something from any audience, better ask yourself whether this is a really a good solution. So basically, people coming to the homepage of AliExpress who want to maybe explore the top offers and the top products that AliExpress want to showcase to their audience, they're going to have no clue what that is. Most of the time, it's better to create a solution that works the same way for everybody, which does not need any shaky ARIA. So how do we fix that one? On our image tag, let's add some alt text. Let's give it a great image description. And as a little aside, if you add height and width to the image tag as well, you prevent cumulative layout shift because the browser paints the space for where the image is going to fall, because I'm sure you've all been to a website where you try and click something, but when JavaScript is finally loaded after 6 seconds, it moves something down the page. That's a nice little trick to make sure that your pages don't shift cumulatively, which is going to become important later as well. So moving on to number 3, missing form input labels, 54.4% of home pages, again, caused by wrong HTML. Now, it's funny because I actually searched the internet for a long time to try and find a really good example of this, and I came up short. So I put a call out on Twitter. Does anyone have a memorable example of an HTML form without labels and without placeholders? A community member and friend of mine, Alex, said he has a gimmicky one on his 404 page on his website to do redirects. So let's have a look at this. I said, these poor screen reader users, and he was quite embarrassed because let me show you what happened. I mean, it looks fancy and lovely, right? You come to this 404 page and you get some ASCII art, you get a fun terminal, and you get the instruction to press enter to continue, which redirects you back to his homepage. Let's just have a look quickly at what that enter kind of thing is doing. It's an HTML form. You can see here, form with an action that goes to the home page, and it's just got the text, autofocus, you press enter, you submit it, and it redirects you to your home page. But as you can see here, there's when you hover over this area with the screen reader, it reads out to you, edit text blank main. And so when you come onto this 404 page as a non-normal monitor user, you have no idea what's going on this page, and actually how do you get to where you need to be. You'll see also in the accessibility tree, ARIA labeled by, not specified, no ARIA label specified, no placeholder in the form, no ARIA placeholder, no title. You read this out, you have no idea. Did this page really need a form? It's fun and it's gimmicky, but what purpose does it serve in terms of being semantic and functional? What's also fun is that if you move your screen reader cursor into the ASCII art, which looks like this, it actually reads this out to you. Underscore new line / space underscore space / space underscore blah, blah. And it was quite wild when I was listening to this. It's going to scare screen readers off, and they are going to bounce right off that website and never, ever come back. Now you can fix that. You can still include the ASCII art and you can fix it by around the ASCII art, giving the div a role of image and giving it a nice ARIA label that when a screen reader is focused on that, it reads it out nicely. So you can include these fancy things, but you have to understand that other people are going to experience these fancy things in a very, very different way. So try and replicate that experience in whatever means you can with accessibility tools in order to make sure you're not excluding people from the experience that you want to create. So whilst that page is fancy, it's not functional. Let's make these pages functional. We can get a little bit too carried away with design, which we, unbeknownst to us, can then start excluding people from being able to use our website. On this note, we looked at placeholders slightly in the accessibility tree. Let's just talk about placeholders a moment. Placeholders are not labels. I'm sure you've seen in many, many websites, there's this design trend at the moment that actually you've got some kind of instruction in the form input. Search here, or please put your name here, or something like that. However, the placeholder attribute specifies a short hint that describes the expected value of an input field, e.g. a sample value or a short description of the expected format. So for example, when you see in an email input field, you see a real email address. In a name field, you see John, and in a surname field, you see Doe, that kind of thing. It shouldn't be telling you actually what to do as a placeholder. Let's go back to AliExpress again, because we all love AliExpress. AliExpress has a placeholder in their top search bar. And what's even more fun is that every time you refresh the page, it's a new value: true love, cars, underwear, Starbucks mugs, etc., etc. And it doesn't have a label on this form. You'll see if you look at the accessibility tree, the placeholder is true love. There is no label. There is nothing. There is no label. So I actually don't know, when I'm hovered over that text field with my screen reader, what I'm meant to do with that. It just reads out true love to me. It doesn't tell me what to do. It doesn't give me any indication. I have no idea. Without a label, that placeholder is meaningless. So what does a good form input look like? You have a label, and the label has a for attribute, which matches the ID of the input so that screen readers can group those HTML elements together. You have a name of that input, you have a type of it, and you have a contextual placeholder, such as my name for a first name. And if you do this, if you don't try and break how forms work, you're actually probably, especially if you're dealing with e-commerce, you're going to get more and more and more conversions, because people can actually use your site if they're not using a computer in a traditional way. Let's move on to empty links. 51.3% of home pages, again, caused by incorrect HTML. And yes, you've guessed it, we're going back to AliExpress. In the footer, AliExpress has a number of social links in the footer, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and they're all SVG icons. You see here that there is a link with a non-breaking space inside that link. So it's kind of like blank inside it. And again, we've got some div soup, generic, 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 link, blank, text, blank. So as a screen reader user, when I'm cycling through these links that you cycle through these focusable elements by default with a screen reader, I have no idea what will happen if I click on that link. It's just going to read nothing out to me. It's not even going to say blank. It's just going to be, and it's not just empty links that are problematic either. Check out this one. You've got the add to basket cart. Again, the basket cart on AliExpress, and you have a little symbol with 0 in. We have more and more div soup. This just says text 0. So as I've focused through the input, you can see it's got Starbucks at the top here. I wasn't joking when I said Starbucks. It just appears with Starbucks. If you've already cycled through that search form, which just reads out true love or Starbucks to you, and then the next item just says 0, I don't even know that I'm on an e-commerce site that is allowing me to search and view what's in my basket. Here's the HTML for the basket icon. It's a link with an icon and just a 0 inside it. And this link it's not going to read this link out to me. It's just going to be link 0. That's what it says. Link 0. Link 0. And again, what even is this? If I'm using a screen reader, what am I even hovering over? I'm just going to bounce straight off that website. How do we fix that? Add an ARIA label to the link. You have 0 items in your basket, go to basket. So tell me what you're trying to tell me visually, and then tell me what's going to happen if you select that link and click on it. It's actually not that much more to do to make that experience a lot more fulfilling for people who use screen readers. Next, missing document language attribute, 28.9% of home pages caused by HTML. So why is this important? In the example of a screen reader, the synthesizer needs to know which language the content is in order to pronounce the output correctly. Otherwise, it will be hard to understand, even if you know the language. We go back to AliExpress. They do not have a lang attribute on their HTML tag. I'm using, Axe DevTools to inspect the HTML here and do an accessibility scan. You can see here in the HTML, they care more about their Facebook implementation and schema than they do the language attribute. And all you need to do is add a language attribute to your HTML. And what's also more interesting is that AliExpress is available in a number of different languages with no lang attributes anywhere. So to a screen reader user, the whole readout is going to sound garbled in whatever language you are listening to. Finally, empty buttons, 26.9% of home pages caused by HTML. And in the example I'm going to show you, CSS. This is wild. And again, we go back to AliExpress for the final finale. This is a product page. And there are some buttons here, which is read out by a screen reader as just button. Presumably the plus button will increment your basket amount that you want to add to your basket, and the minus button will decrement. However, as a screen reader user, I have no context. I have no idea how I can add 10 of these magic fire, colorful flames, powder bonfire sachets to my basket. Let's have a look at the HTML. Button, type equals button, fair enough. Class, and it's got an icon inside it. And this icon actually has nothing inside it. And how is that plus and minus added? It's added with CSS, and you will actually not believe that actually the character that comes out in the Chrome DevTools is unrecognized by Chrome. I presume they mean a plus or a minus, but if you look here, it's actually coming out as unrecognized. So even if a screen reader was able to parse CSS, this is an unsupported character somehow. And I had to bring the what duck out for that because I've never seen anything like it. How do we fix that? Let's give it an actual real plus. Why don't we just give it a real character inside it? Why are we adding that content with CSS? And let's give it a proper label, ARIA label, increase quantity, decrease quantity. Let's be descriptive about our HTML. So we can see all of these ridiculous violations found in the wild all the time in so much of the web, and the top 50 websites, no less. So how do we deal with accessibility for broken screens? How do we make sure that people can navigate life-saving information in the apocalypse? Don't fake content with CSS and weird unsupported characters. Always use semantic HTML to make sure that your visitors can navigate through, can use forms correctly, can understand the context of your web page, wherever they are, links, forms, buttons. Because if the web is unusable in the apocalypse, we know that everyone dies. So wrapping up, right? Why is all of this important now? We are not in an apocalypse. Most people use computers with monitors, and they can see, and they have fast internet connections and blah, blah, blah. Let's recap. How do we prepare the web for the apocalypse of 2031? We start with semantic HTML. We use minimal CSS because it's render blocking and causes pages to load slower. We use as little JavaScript as possible because it causes our pages to load in 25 seconds on a slow 3G. And why is this important now? Worldwide, the internet is actually really slow. Here is a World Population Review.com internet speed by country survey done in 2021. And you'll see that the average internet speed is 55.13 megabits per second. If you look at the Chromium DevTools slow 3G code that I got from GitHub to understand how they were calculating it, this number is 51.2 megabytes per second in Chromium DevTools, which is very, very similar to the average internet speed in the world. We're talking the world and how people use the internet mainly on mobile devices. Furthermore, globally, at least 2.2 billion people have a near or distance vision impairment. I am one of them. My eyes are terrible. I actually can't see a lot of this low contrast stuff. I have to work in a big kind of, I've got flux on now because I have such a white screen. I have to work in dark mode with flux on. My eyes are very poor. And this is a thing, not all users of screen readers also have vision impairment. So you've got people who are blind, you've got people who are very short-sighted, you've got people who, like me, I can correct my vision with glasses, but the color contrast thing is still a problem. WebAIM did another survey about the disability types that people have who are using screen readers. And it's not just blind people who are using screen readers. Yes, they are the main population who use screen readers. We've got visually impaired, such as me, cognitive disabilities, deafness or hard of hearing disabilities, motor disabilities, and other. So there's quite a lot of people here that it's not just about blind people. It's not just about people who can't use a mouse or a keyboard. It's basically a lot of the population. And also don't forget that some people are temporarily disabled. Some people might have a broken arm and they can't use a mouse or a keyboard properly for 3 months or something like that. And everyone in the world, regardless of how able they are right now, has the potential to be disabled at some point. And therefore, we have a responsibility to build websites for everyone, taking this into consideration. Lastly, Google now uses Core Web Vitals as of June 2021 as a ranking factor in search results. Now, what are Core Web Vitals? We lightly touched on them at the beginning, looking at the first time to interactive and things like that. So the first one is the largest contentful paint, which is how quickly does the page render. So if your page loads quicker with minimal CSS and minimal JavaScript, Google is going to rank that higher in search engines. The first input delay, how quickly does the page respond to user input? You might have all experienced being on a page where it's starting to load. It looks like it's coming in and loaded, but you can't use it yet because it hasn't been hydrated with the JavaScript interactivity. And then thirdly, cumulative layout shift, which I mentioned that before about adding your width and height, width and height attributes to an image tag to prevent that. That is how stable the page layout is. How much does it move around? What's being loaded in later? And how is it going to affect people using it if they click on something accidentally with some kind of UX dark patterns? These are the three things. To get the most out of largest contentful paint, get content to your users as fast as possible. Make your web application usable as soon as possible. Make your web application as stable as possible. If it's fast, quick, and stable, you can save lives in the apocalypse of 2021. If you don't make your page fast, if you don't get your content to your users to save their lives when they're being ridden with zombies, and if the website is moving about and people can't click on stuff and find what they need, you're going to be forgotten in the apocalypse. Here's a nice apocalypse image that I thought I'd include. Billions of people use the internet on a slow connection. Millions of people use the internet via a screen reader. People won't find your website if it's not performant or accessible. The apocalypse of 2031 might not happen, but if it does, with this information, I hope you can make your websites apocalypse ready and will be prepared. Build stuff, learn things, love what you do. I am White Panther. You can find me on all of these social platforms all the time. And it's been great being here. Thank you very much. It's been nice and chill.
That was an incredible talk. So I have questions, but there's one that's come in straight from James Hugman in the chat already. How might post-apocalyptic browsers help make AliExpress more usable, assuming that they don't pull their finger out and do it themselves?
Yeah, browsers are a big one because browsers are always trying to make stuff faster, better caching, you know, trying to make things easier to debug. I mean, there's so many different tools that actually come out with browsers in terms of being able to inspect your CSS layouts, being able to inspect your JavaScript and how it's loaded with the whole waterfall thing. I guess post-apocalyptic browsers just need to block CSS and block JavaScript and then just get the content out there, really. So then you're going back to like the 80s and the 90s where there was no JavaScript and there was no CSS. So that's probably where I would see it going, because there'd be no need. There'd be no need for CSS and JavaScript when you can't see anything and when you need, you're just living in a wasteland. So that's the key. No CSS, no JavaScript. Like Astro is trying to do, go back to just no JavaScript, or ship as little JavaScript as possible rather than all the JavaScript. Maybe browsers could get in on that too and have that responsibility.
Nice. Sorry, James is saying, yes, still screen readers in the dark.
Well, with semantic HTML, maybe browsers could use some kind of AI machine learning to actually unfuddle your terrible non-semantic HTML. As long as you're using semantic HTML, everything is fine. So maybe browsers could help with that. But I don't know, because they're going to get it wrong. They're going to get it wrong because browsers, AI cannot really determine that much intent and context, really. I don't ever think. Maybe it'll surprise me, but AI is still basically written by humans, isn't it?
It is. And as someone that worked in data science for a little while, it is wonderful technology, but it's still quite naive. Yeah, a series of nested if statements, James is saying.
If HTML tag is this, then probably it should be this. If there is no ARIA label, then make one up. If there is no text, then maybe just put this in. It will just, I want to build this now.
Yeah, you should. I hadn't learned about the Google Shift for core web vitals, but that's actually really encouraging, and I think that sort of harks back to James's question a little bit. It might not fix AliExpress, but at least punishes them a little bit, which really helps. It's also quite a technical achievement to be able to detect the time to first input, right? Because what do you define as first input? Like and like, do you wait until like when they press the button, some JavaScript is fired, and what JavaScript and things like that. But yeah, it's clever stuff, and I think that's a really important big part of the solution. I have a somewhat alternate question. I was noting your heavy use of AliExpress in the examples, and my initial reaction is, good God, what are these people doing? You know, and then I kind of realized that I know what they're doing. They're developers who are being incentivized in a certain way, and they are not being incentivized at all to make their content accessible in any way, shape, and form. They're just being told to ship features, whatever. Now, like, I don't think that's an isolated example. I think that there are going to be plenty of developers worldwide who are working in an environment where they are not being asked to put in accessibility, and in fact it might actively harm them if they spend too much time doing accessibility. So do you think that this is an all or nothing thing, or do you think that do you think that having at least awareness of how your website would be used via a screen reader would be enough to build intrinsic motivation to put in things where you wouldn't be asked normally?
This is an extremely multifaceted question, and I have a series of multifaceted answers. So as a tech lead, this was obviously a big thing that I had to communicate to my clients when I worked at an agency. I've also worked at very big e-commerce as well. And a lot of the time, like you say, it was like, we need this feature. And it's some big guy at the top saying, I want that feature now, build that feature for me, how I want to use it. And quick, get it out, because time is money and I'm paying you to get this feature out for me. And I've been at the point where I've had to fight the, hang on, can we just like spend a bit more time on this and ensure we test it properly and make sure that it's accessible. And I've been told, no, there's no time, there's no budget, we don't have budget for accessibility. But like, if you're building a product, that needs to be factored in from the earlier stage, but it shouldn't fall on the developers to have to fight up. It should fall on the product owners and those stakeholders to be educated about their customers and the world in order to say, okay, we need to make this properly, because you're going to make more money at the end of the day, aren't you? Secondly, QA teams, I know a lot, I've worked in a lot of places where developers do their own QA, but actually I think that's a bit of a fallacy, in that you need people to QA your product who are blind, who are deaf, who are disabled in other ways, who have cognitive disabilities or whatever, because these are the people in the real world who are using your products. And so we get same old people testing these products. Oh, they're just flicking around on a screen reader. Oh, they're just making sure that it works with the keyboard navigation. But do you really know what it's like to use a product and a website like that? I don't. I really don't. I try my best to educate myself, but I really don't know what it's like. I try to use VoiceOver on my phone sometimes. I have a shortcut, and I get really frustrated because I'm not used to it. And I know a lot of people, if they've been using like VoiceOver or something for many, many years, it's going to become more intuitive. But it's even worse if it's frustrating, plus coupled with an absolutely unsemantic website. And so the education needs to come from the tech owners, the CTOs, and the product owners to ensure that these products are being tested by real people who will be using products like this in that way. It's difficult because, going back to our first conversation about equality in the tech industry and being a woman, being a marginalized person, being a disabled person, there aren't many of those people in tech, right? Working in tech. So how can you fill your QA department with that many people with that many different disabilities? It's impossible right now. And that's, again, another reason why tech is kind of in the state it's in, is because, and no offense to any of you about this, but white tech bro dudes are building all the tech in the way they know how to use, as a white tech bro dude, this technology. And I've seen a lot of stuff about body recognition and facial recognition. It doesn't work with Black people because of the way the technology has been developed. Like, why haven't you got all these people with this variety of skin colors to test your products that relies on being seen? So I could go on a rabbit hole for all of this stuff that we talk about. This is why I talk about this. It's fundamentally to do, like, this accessibility issues in AliExpress. It's fundamentally to do with the culture in the tech industry. And because we don't have people in the industry working, building these products for those people, you just can't get the same level of insight. Yes, you can educate yourself, but you can't ever do it properly unless you have the most diverse team that represents your customers building those products.
Brilliant answer. Thank you so much. Amal, you've had your hand up for a little while. Go for it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Salma, thank you for this incredible talk. I mean, I learned a ton, and like, it's just amazing to me, like, that developers are using CSS to inject icons, into the DOM. Like, why? I don't know why people make their lives more complicated than they but whatever. Really, oh my God, I'm just like, was there some like viral Stack Overflow answer that just went crazy or something and people are just reusing code? It's anyways. But I just wanted to say, I actually always tell engineers, I'm a principal engineer, and so I'm kind of ahead of teams a lot. And I always tell engineers that, like, we need to take ownership of tech debt and accessibility. And it's a partnership with our product teams, to explain, the importance of XYZ. I've never heard the argument that you made, and I 100% agree with you that, like, product teams need to understand that they need to, create products that are accessible for their customers. I've never heard it from that side. So thanks for sharing it. But I just want to say, like, I push back on teams to say, like, no one is ever going to say, like, write tests or fix tech debt or, make this accessible, make this responsive. Like, it's especially with this no QA model that we're shifting towards, right? So I want to say, like, I push it on engineers, but I think you're right. I think it's also product.
It's hard, like you say, it should be a team effort. It should be, and engineers, some, you get some junior engineers, and these late career people into tech and stuff who don't have that confidence or that knowledge yet to know how important it is, because all they're being told to do is, can you make that button go over there, and can you build that accordion, and can you build that carousel? You're actually, it's a shift. And I think Agile tried to do this kind of thing where it's based on value add. And I always like to think of a minimum lovable product or a minimum usable product rather than a minimum viable product, because normally a minimum viable product is not actually usable by many people. And so I think there just needs to be, it needs to come from everyone at all angles all the time. But I fought this battle for years and years, and I kind of gave up and I kind of changed tact and started to talk to people about it who actually wanted to listen. But again, that's a problem, because the people who want to listen, like yourself, they're already kind of switched on to the issues that we're facing. And it's a bit like how when I made Unbreak.tech, to try and get to a different audience. So maybe we need like an accessibility thing for that kind of audience who need to have their mind changed a little bit. Because
yeah, no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize.
Okay, you carry on. I think I finished.
Zoom inflections are hard. But no, I just wanted to say yes, yes, and yes. But I also do think it's the gap is in the tooling, right? So with developers are extremely lazy, and asking them to do any more work or click any more buttons or check any more boxes than they already do, it's like not going to happen, right? So we need to build better tooling. We need to build this into frameworks. We need to, whatever it is, right? Improve the frameworks, improve the landscape, the ecosystem. So developers have to do less, right? But I also do think what you said about having blind folks and people with other physical disabilities, like test your website. Like, I was like, is there a service for that? Because I feel like that should be a company. Like,
yeah,
somebody should create a company for, testers in the wild that have different kinds of, just physical impairments, and let them give you feedback on how to make this product better. Like,
there are pros and cons to that, I think, because on the one hand, you've got these people testing your products and giving you that valuable feedback, but on the other hand, it's seen as an external thing. So it's not the developer's responsibility, it's not the team's responsibility. We'll just hand it off to this agency and they'll give us this checklist to do. We'll do the checklist, bam, 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 it's done, not my problem anymore. And so whilst it sounds valuable, I think, again, it goes against the culture shift there needs to be inside tech companies. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Again, I am humbly learning. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. And really, thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions. I've got some in chat as well.
Yeah, so not so many questions, but Sam Levels pointed out that since Sam's become more aware of moving accessibility now afterthought as a foundation, the biggest problem is onboarding other people. Have you found that as well?
So this, I think, is another symptom of the tech bro dude tech culture, where traversing binary trees and fancy algorithms are more important than creating usable, accessible products. I have this argument all the time with people, this whole CSS isn't a programming language, HTML isn't a programming language, you can't do algorithms and blah 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 with that stuff, when actually CSS and HTML are the foundations of how people use the web. You can't build a single website with just Python or a single website with just Go. You need HTML and CSS to put it in the browser. And I think there's this whole big culture that CSS and HTML is easy, so you shouldn't bother with it, and you should focus on the hard stuff because that's the elite cool stuff. And yes, James, seriously. But that's the problem, because people on social media, they're getting caught up in all this weird elitist kind of tech culture. And it still really feels like HTML and CSS and accessibility is this kind of marginalized movement that we're fighting from the sidelines to try and advocate for a better web and world for everyone. But we're getting beaten down by having to, I can't traverse a binary tree, don't want to.
Yeah, exactly. And Bradley's just circling back to James's question and saying that on the slowest connections, Chrome will proxy sites through their servers to transcode sites into a pre-rendered version, which which I'd forgotten about actually. Yeah,
I
that's
didn't
very
know
cool.
that actually.
Yeah.
Thank you for teaching me something. I need to save that link. Interesting.
Sadly, of course, that's not going to work on iPhones because there is no proper Chrome on an iPhone. There's only fake Chrome on an iPhone. But yeah, I need to shoot shortly. But does anyone else have any further questions?
I had a point that might help others. On it's not quite all the way there, but for folks who might look at web development and think, hey, when it takes effort to go and look at that screen reader view and put some time aside and test things properly. And yeah, definitely agree with the argument of that's why developers aren't the best QA, but having dedicated QA can really highlight those things. But I've picked up a browser extension. Actually, I think there's a Python-based browser that's fully keyboard-based, but there's actually an extension that's in Chrome and Firefox and the likes called Saka Key, and it allows you to. So I try and avoid using my mouse as much as possible, coming from sort of IDE to browser, and you just hit a key like S or F, and it sort of highlights links, and you can navigate the page without using a mouse, and it's quite a useful way to see the sort of semantic structure of the page, and especially if you're using it while developing something of your own, you can see there's sort of overlapping links there, or those buttons don't quite work, and it seems to be a little bridge into sort of the accessible web, but for everyday use.
Oh, I love it. I hate using a mouse. Thank you. I can't wait to try that.
No, actually, I have a question that's somewhat related. I'm curious, like, if like a lot of these tools and like there's, I don't know, people have guides, but I was curious if like some type of a certification program for web accessibility is something that you think could be valuable. Just because developers, like, I feel like sometimes there's just a big knowledge gap, like myself included, and
so I think like Free Code Camp does a really good job of teaching it right from the outset with HTML and CSS and their basic web stuff. I just personally, I know a lot of people are starting, they've had like 15 years of web experience and haven't even touched on this, but I think it's the responsibility of universities and educational materials and courses and boot camps to teach it from the very beginning, even if you're teaching a back-end language, right? Because I think you need to know the fundamentals of how the web works and how browsers load stuff and how people experience your websites. And I think there's a fight between back-end and front-end devs, isn't there? It's like, oh, front-end devs so easy, go and color in, and then no offense to any back-end devs here, but you go and find a back-end dev who's going to try and build a website and they go, oh, it's not so easy, is it? So there needs to be more of a coming together and more of a breaking down of this, like, elitism and accessibility is just, it shouldn't, I know what you're saying, Amal, but I don't want it to be an after, I don't want it to be like an extra thing, like it shouldn't be an extra qualification or something. Yes, it can be a specialism because you can't specialize in everything. Even as a front-end developer, you can't specialize in everything. But I think there needs to be some campaigning and some real like guerrilla, like get accessibility at the very beginning of web dev courses and anything you do, I think, because it's the only way it's going to change it.
Yeah, no, again, thank you yet again for like showing me the way. You're right. It's not an afterthought or pre-dinner or or an appetizer. It's the meal. It's like the salt, right? It's like part of the thing. So I think accessibility might have a marketing problem. I think everything you talked to me about was like 80% performance in many ways. And I wonder if we should just call accessibility like web perf, because quite frankly, like, I think developers seem to be a lot more excited about that problem. And, I wonder if we could just trick a bunch of people into just, making their website more performant,
Yeah,
but no,
you're right. Marketing problem is interesting because I think, again, it's like,
I think it's also seen as, there's the glue, it's, I talk about this glue job, these glue jobs at companies that are really critical roles, people who make everybody connect and whatever, but like, these roles are mostly filled by women, and women are seen as less valuable, and yada, 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 right? So
Baba,
there's
it goes on and on.
none of
It
that
always
stigma,
goes back to that.
Yeah, it always kind of goes back to that, right? So, but anyways, no, but thank you again. I'll shut up now.
Thank you. I think, yeah, it's just, again, it's a cultural thing. It's like the people who are marginalized are talking about this stuff the most. The disabled people who can't use your websites are talking about it the most, but there's so few of them compared to all of the other people who can use the websites. And it's just that problem where people aren't being listened to and seen as part of everyday life. Because, you know, I actually don't know a blind person. And so to think about blind people is actually an effort for me, because I don't know anyone who's blind. And that can go, and that's the same for quite a lot of people probably in the world. And, you know, people don't know people who are disabled, who can't walk, or who have autism and things like that. And so because you don't see it as a normal tech dev in the world, general, going about your life, you don't think about it unless you're forced to think about it. And again, with the whole pressure of tech culture, you don't have space and time to think about these things when your product manager is quick, deadline, 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 feature, feature, feature. It's a whole big mishmash of nonsense. It's a reflection of just the world at large and capitalism, and I could go on, but it's more than accessibility. It's a world problem, really, that's manifesting itself in one of these ways, which is a big shame. I don't think we can solve it. All I can do is keep shouting about it and get other people to as well.
And please do, Salma. Thank you so much, Salma. It's been incredible.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks everyone else. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.